Hey guys, continuing Iamblichus Exhortation to Philosophy text, chapter 16. Okay, so in this part of the chapter, Iamblichus says that virtues of the body, we're not born with them. They're developed over time, during the life. And I understand this, he means what is good for the body. For example, muscle. I was not born with muscle. I had to develop it, and the same applies to psychology. Different psychological parts. I was not born with them. I had to develop them. I was born with the potential to develop them, and if that potential is realized, actualized, if it is used, then the person develops virtues of the body. And he says because we're not born with virtues of the body, because we have to develop them during life, the same applies to the soul. We're not born with virtues of the soul. We have to develop them. And here I understand that he means things like fortitude, temperance, justice, and other psychic virtues, as he often I think several times he called justice also a psychic virtue, if I'm not mistaken, in this text. Also courage and other such things. Things that apply to psychology, characteristics and so forth. Insights into things. So he says we need to develop this. And that living a life full of these and studying philosophy will lead us to wisdom. Okay. So the function of philosophy, he says, is to purify the soul and the body of the impurities that they obtain in this world of generation, in the physical reality. So philosophy helps us to purify those and to align us to live according to virtue and partake in justice and other virtues, he says. So he links justice to virtues, if my notes are not mistaken, in this chapter. Okay, then the very interesting thing he does next is the following. He says, just as he says, we can look at an evil person and they do evil things in life. And they can be cunning about the way they do evil things. They can scheme and plan, and there's clearly some wisdom involved in how they do their evil things. They're clearly using their reasoning powers, but they're using it for evil. And here is the interesting part. Iamblichus says, this is because their positioning towards wisdom is done incorrectly. Their positioning is done in such a way that they're using whatever wisdom they have in an evil way. And what is that? It is to serve the body. Which is typically, if we look at evil people, typically they do the things they do to serve the body, to make more money so they can buy better things, or to have more power, to control other people. Is to serve the physical reality, their presence in the physical reality. Typically it's like this. And he says this positioning, whether we use wisdom for evil or for good, depends on our conditioning to a big degree. And he gives an example. He says, if those evil people in their childhood, from the beginning of their childhood, if they were stripped away of the things that fed their body, and it could be all kinds of pleasures and such things, if they were stripped away of these luxuries, and instead they were given just the basic necessities, and if they were given philosophy, studies and so forth from the very beginning, they would grow up in such a way that they would their positioning towards wisdom would be the right one. they would not use wisdom, they would not use themselves for evil, they would use themselves for good, just because of how they were brought up. And this is fascinating, because immediately with this, he proves that virtues of the soul, such as justice and other virtues, are indeed influenced by our conditioning, by our childhood. And things like whether someone is evil or good is influenced to a huge degree by the past, by the kind of life they've lived before, by the influence other people had on them from childhood, and specifically by how much, as I understand it, by how much their physical desires were satisfied, by how much access they had to pleasures and luxuries and such things. So this is quite fascinating. And of course, we can see this so clearly in psychology. When a person is psychologically seriously disturbed, it is very often because their childhood was disturbing. And we can even trace the specific disturbances to the kinds of things that they are then disturbed about 20, 30, 40 years later on. The clearest and easiest examples are, for example, when I work with couples, or a person comes to me and they have a problem in their relationship. That problem can often be traced back to the relationship that person had with a member of the family in their childhood. And it can be very direct, very, very direct example. So the easiest example would be when, for example, a woman is choosing a man who is a copy of her father. Even if the man is very destructive and very painful to her, so he disrespects her, beats her, insults her, and so forth. She chooses him, and she cannot leave him. No matter how hard she tries, she goes into a panic mode when she thinks about leaving him. And we start to dig deeper. What do we see? We see that her father, for example, suddenly left the family when she was young, and that had a shock, traumatic effect on her. And for example, her mother was always drinking after that, so she was left alone. So what happens now is this new man in her life, sorry to diverge a little bit into psychology, so this man in her life, a part of her sees her father in this man and holds on to him like that. And she realizes if she loses him, or at least that part of her believes that if she loses this man, she will experience incredible pain, similar to what she experienced, emotional pain, when her father left her when she was young. Because to that part, there is an overlap. In psychotherapy, we call it an overlap, a conjoining of two people, her father and this man, in her mind, to a part of her mind. The two are kind of mixed up. So when we work with this person, we often work to separate the idea of this man and the father in her mind through different techniques. So she can see that, at least, so that part of her that's grips onto this man, thinking that it's her father essentially. So that part lets go. And often we see a person completely drops their attachment to the person once this part of therapy is done. It's quite fascinating to watch. So what was the point of this story? The point was that childhood, one small relationship with one person, such as a father, was not a small relationship, but one situation from that relationship, when father left the family, for example, could have a traumatic effect and influence for the remaining life of the person, to such an extent that the person can choose a loved one, or a husband or a wife, who would be incredibly bad for them. And with time, they become like this person in this relationship. If that person is evil, they become evil. I've seen this so many times. The person we choose to be by our side, we will gradually absorb their energies, their psychology. And if it is a good person, we will absorb that goodness And if it is an evil person, we will absorb the evil. We will absorb their thinking patterns. We will absorb their emotional reactions. If they're paranoid, we'll absorb their paranoia. I've seen people go pretty much insane by being in a relationship with very evil people for a long time, while before that they were kind and friendly. After a long time with an evil person, they went evil and they went pretty much insane. So what does this tell us? It tells us that our past, our childhood at least, and everything that follows from that, positions us in such a way that we can use wisdom, whatever wisdom we have, to distract ourselves, or to even create evil things. Or we can use it for good. Yeah, so this is a very powerful part of the text, at least for me. I don't know how it is for you, this part, but I find it quite powerful. It also tells us why it is often so hard to step on the philosophical path, because of this conditioning that we've had before. To step on the philosophical path for us would be to do something that most of us have not been exposed to at all before. It is literally like to step into another world, to climb out of the cave, even at least to poke our head out of the cave of ignorance. And if you think about it, if we had years or decades of thinking in a certain way, reacting in a certain way, then this is a completely different world for us. So it is understandable why people find it confusing, difficult, annoying, irritating, scary, and why they don't want to pursue a spiritual path or philosophical path. That is quite understandable. But Iamblichus says if you develop the virtues of the soul, then your life will be better. And countless arguments already through the previous chapters have proven that. Your work will be better, your love relationships will be better, everything will be better. Even though sometimes things might be scary if your mind is adapting to new ways of experiencing this reality. Yeah. So let's do a quick meditation now, and then we'll finish with that. You can do any meditation. You can do any meditation you want. I do a little prayer. Thank you. You can click on the video now if YouTube will show another video to watch the rest of my channel. Thank you, all the best.